Hi, friends. The title of this video is They All Pointed Him Out. Robert Maxwell, fraudster, Mossad agent, and promoter of Holocaust education. Isn't that interesting? And there he is with his daughter and his wife. You know, she just got in trouble. Robert Maxwell was one of the most notorious fraudsters of the 20th century. Within days of his still unexplained death in November 1991, when he supposedly fell from his yacht, November 5th, 1991. Remember the 5th of November. He supposedly fell from his yacht off the Canary Islands. Maxwell's business empire collapsed with debts of more than $400 million, which he stole from everybody. It is ironic that temporarily, at least, his infamy has been taken over by that of his youngest child, Ghislaine, after whom Maxwell named the yacht on which he made his fatal journey. Ghislaine, I hate her name, was convicted last December of multiple offenses connected to the financier and sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, and is presently jailed awaiting what seems certain to be a long prison sentence. Her notoriety, no doubt, attracted many viewers to the recent BBC television series House of Maxwell. But despite its many interviews with important players in the family saga, this series, I'm not comfortable. Okay. This series was almost entirely avoided the topic of Robert Maxwell's relationship with the British, Israeli, and Soviet bloc intelligence services. Given that Maxwell was one of the pioneers of Holocaust education in the UK, his multiple connections to the murky world of international espionage dating back to the Second World War deserve more detailed scrutiny, especially since numerous documents are becoming available shedding light on this topic. A section of my forthcoming book about British intelligence, international Zionism, and the Holocaust, which will be published later this year in association with my Real History website, will examine Maxwell's multiple loyalties in greater detail. Okay, the BBC series and even the recent book about Maxwell by John Preston, which I reviewed in issue 103 of Heritage and Destiny, made very little use of these documents. In fact, while introducing new interviews and new evidence on many other topics where the espionage world was concerned, the BBC contented themselves with a very brief and unsatisfactory summary by Maxwell's biographer Tom Bauer and some very old archive footage used in previous film documentaries. One clip from the series that was interesting was a footage of Maxwell being interviewed by the Israeli Holocaust Memorial, Yad Vashem. His overt connections to Zionism, and despite his Jewish heritage, only began in 1984. Isn't that interesting? When fellow tycoon Gerald Ronson, I'm going to have to look him up too, a former financial fixer for the violent anti-fascist 62 group, which itself had ties to Israeli intelligence, to 1962, the year before JFK Sr. died, took him to Israel to meet its new prime minister, former Stern Gang terrorist leader Yitzhak Shamir. For the last 7 years of his life, Maxwell was to have ever closer public ties to Israel. Earlier links, including arms deals and other secret operations dating back to the earliest days of the Zionist state in the 1940s, remain secret to this day, but will be examined in my forthcoming book. Despite his many crimes, Robert Maxwell was only jailed one time, very briefly by the wartime Hungarian authorities in 1940. Oh, remember that time when George Soros pretended he wasn't in Israeli and he was in Hungary pretending to be Hungary? That's what this guy did too, but he didn't use Hungary, he used Scotland. He escaped and joined an army of Czech exiles who eventually made their way to England. At some point in 1944, having changed his name from Jan Hoke to Robert Maxwell. Oh, there's his original name. I'm going to dig that later after this video. The young Jew became a British officer and was very entrusted with intelligence-related missions. You don't say. Though only just past his 22nd birthday, Maxwell was entrusted with the interrogation of important German prisoners, including Hermann Gisks, who had been in charge of one of the few highly successful German intelligence operations against Britain, when almost the entire Dutch resistance network, supposedly working for the British sabotage agency SOE, was taken over by Gisks. and turned supplying false information to London for several years. Now, this is getting interesting. Another important prisoner interrogated by the young Maxwell was Major Willy Johann Meyer, Adolf Hitler's last army adjutant. Interesting. So, if Adolf Hitler was a bad dude that killed good Jews, why did they try to get info about that? Interesting. A day before the Führer's death, Johann Meyer had been entrusted with one of several copies of his last will and testament. That's interesting. What did he say? And instructed to deliver it to the last commander-in-chief of the German army, Field Marshal Ferdinand Schoner. Now look at that picture. Who do you see? Mr. Big Stuff. A 1989 photograph taken on board Maxwell's yacht, Lady Ghislaine, from which he was to fall, jump, or be pushed to his death. 2 years later, left to right, Donald Trump. Oh, wait. Okay, so this picture was taken 2 years before his death. Left to right, Donald Trump, Robert Maxwell, Steve Ross, chief executive of cable television and publishing empire, Time Warner. Oh, that's interesting. And Mike Wallace. Oh, you don't say. Then the most famous television journalist in America. Apart from Trump, everyone in this photo is Jewish. Are you getting it? Recently released documents at the UK National Archives, which I am the first author to examine, show that special influence was exerted by high-ranking officials to speed up Maxwell's naturalization as a British citizen immediately after the war. He pretended he wasn't a Jew. By this time, Britain was fighting a new war against Zionist terrorism in Palestine, and security authorities became concerned about numerous Jews, including future Israeli Foreign Minister Abba Eban, who had served before 1945 as British officers in various sensitive roles. Oh, just like Robert? Isn't that interesting? Yet, for some reason, Maxwell seems to have been exempt from any suspicion of dual loyalties. In fact, despite Whitehall's new worries about Zionist supervision and terror, Maxwell's career in British intelligence seemed to have flourished. Soon after the war, M16 created a special section to obtain and exploit German scientific intelligence. The operatives was to grab valuable research before it could fall into the hands of our wartime allies, who were now either enemies of the Soviet Union or commercial rivals, USA and France. This operation was to be run by nominally independent publishing firm called Butterworths. Oh my gosh. Which had been reorganized with trusted British intelligence officers as directors, notably Hugh Quinnell, a city solicitor who during the war had been in charge of SOE's sabotage organization in Spain, Portugal, and North Africa. You don't say. They ruined him. He had been forced to resign from this SOE position after taking responsibility for a disastrous explosion on board of the Tangier Gibraltar ferry in January 42, a consignment of limpet mines, detonators, and other explosives had been packed into diplomatic bags, which by international convention cannot be searched by border security, and loaded into the ferry at Gibraltar. Unfortunately, the explosives hadn't been securely packed and became unstable in transit. In the early hours of the morning, soon after the ferry had docked in neutral Tangier, the port was rocked by a huge explosion, killing 10 Moroccan civilians and 4 Gibraltar policemen. The disaster was publicly blamed on a German or Italian bomb, but behind the scenes, a secret British Board of Inquiry established SOE's responsibility. So do you see how they just covertly did terrorism? That's how they do it now. It's not citizens. Secret British agents. Zionism. Babylon. Okay, so this is really boring. Okay, as Quinnell wrote to London in a top-secret telegram on the 17th of March, 1941, steps were being taken to secure the slaughter by the Moors of all Germans in French and Spanish Morocco as soon as the Germans moved. You know, that's who they really are. They're Germans. turned Israeli. I don't believe the Israeli term. Experience of dealing with the gangster Juan March no doubt prepared Kunal for working with a much younger Jewish crook, Robert Maxwell, who was only in his mid-20s and beginning his life of high-level crime when he entered the publishing business with Kunal and other M16 operatives. Butterworth began a partnership with the German scientific publisher Springer, which was to be the start of what became Pergamon Press, the cornerstone of Maxwell's business empire, whose collapse led to his still unexplained death in November 5th, 1991. By far, the most sensitive aspect of his work during the 50s involved nuclear physics. Yep. Maxwell worked closely with two of his most controversial spies in the history of nuclear science, both of whom are still mysterious decades after their deaths. Paul Rosebud, co-founder of Pergamon Press with Maxwell. Before and during the Second World War, he was the most important British spy within the German scientific establishment, reporting to M16, or is that MI6, on both the German nuclear weapons program, which progressed a long way scientifically, but not in terms of practical weapons production, and the V-2 rocket program, which was eventually the basis for post-war American development of space rockets. You don't say. Rosebound worked with the MI6 German specialist Frank Foley, and his reports were delivered to London via the Norwegian networks run by SOEs. Sir Charles Hambros. It was therefore no coincidence that Hambros Merchant Bank, retaining ties to British intelligence, funded Maxwell and Roseband's publishing company after the war. MI6 has persistently refused to release information about Rosebud, but my research has explored two endearing mysteries. Firstly, how did Rosebud retain such an influential position in the Third Reich scientific establishment when he was married to a Jewess, which he sent to London with their child? Yeah, how? Why did Hitler want to kill the Jews? Robert Maxwell's a Jew. He's the most notorious criminal in the world. Okay, so what I really want to show y'all is this stuff here. In 1986, Maxwell tipped off the Israeli embassy in London about nuclear whistleblower Mordechai Vanunu facilitating his kidnap by Mossad. Vanunu ended up spending 18 years in an Israeli prison, including 11 of those years in solitary confinement. But how much did Maxwell himself contribute to Israel's covert nuclear program decades later via his close association with nuclear scientists of dubious loyalty such as Roseband and Mann? And look, there he is with Margaret Thatcher. Okay. And this is the man who was once one of the first promoters of Holocaust studies in Britain, hosting an international conference in Oxford in July 1988 under the title Remembering for the Future, featuring 260 academics, including I'm not saying his name, Israel's leading Holocaust scholar. The conference took 5 years to arrange and focus, especially on bringing together Jewish and Christian academics. Yeah. So that you'll never point the bad people out. They blended in with the Christians. You can't believe what you read. You just can't believe it. This was an important foundation of what has since become an unchallengeable edifice of Holocaust history